There is a book sitting quietly on a shelf somewhere that has changed the way thousands of people think about their own minds, their own lives, and what they are truly capable of becoming. It was written over a century ago, and yet every single word inside it feels like it was written specifically for the moment you are living in today. Christian D. Larson, one of the most thoughtful and compassionate writers of his time, poured something rare into this book. He did not write it to impress scholars or to fill pages with complicated theories. He wrote it because he genuinely believed that every single human being walking this earth has something extraordinary buried inside them, something most people never find, something most people never even go looking for, and he wanted to change that. This is the story of that hidden secret. Not the kind of secret that is whispered behind closed doors or locked away in some vault. This is the kind of secret that has always been right there, living inside you, breathing with you every moment of your life, waiting, patiently and quietly, for the day you finally decide to pay attention to it. Larson believed that the greatest tragedy in human life is not suffering, not failure, not even loss. The greatest tragedy, he said, is a person who goes through their entire existence never realizing what they were actually capable of, never realizing that the power they were searching for out in the world was always, always inside them. And if you have ever felt stuck, ever felt like life was moving in circles, ever felt like you were giving everything you had and still not getting where you wanted to go, then what Larson has to say is going to feel like someone finally handed you the key to a door you did not even know existed. Let us begin at the very beginning, because that is where Larson begins too. He opens with a simple but deeply unsettling question. He asks why it is that so many people, intelligent people, hard-working people, sincere people, seem to go through life without ever reaching the kind of life they truly want. They work hard, they try, they push themselves, and yet something always seems to be missing, something always seems to hold them back, and most of them spend years, sometimes their entire lives, looking for the problem somewhere out there, blaming circumstances, blaming other people, blaming luck or the economy or their family or their past. Larson says gently but clearly, the problem is not out there. It never was. The problem and the solution both live in the same place, the mind. Now, before you think this is just another motivational speech about positive thinking, stay with this, because Larson goes far deeper than that. He is not simply telling you to smile and hope for the best. He is talking about something structural, something that happens inside the human mind at a level most people never bother to explore. He is talking about the fact that most people are using only a tiny fraction of what their mind is actually capable of, not because they are not smart enough, not because they were not born with the right gifts, but because nobody ever taught them how to use the full instrument they were given. Think of it this way. Imagine someone handed you the most powerful, most sophisticated piece of technology ever created, and nobody gave you the manual. Nobody told you what it could do. You would fumble around with it. You would use only the basic functions you stumbled onto by accident. You would never even discover 90% of what it could do. That is what most people are doing with their own minds. They are fumbling around with the most magnificent instrument in the universe, using only the most basic surface-level functions, and wondering why the results feel so limited. Larson wanted to write the manual. He starts by talking about what he calls the inner life. And this is where things get really interesting, because he does not approach the inner life as a vague spiritual concept. He approaches it as something real, something functional, something that can be understood, developed, and directed. The inner life, he says, is the deeper current running beneath all the thoughts and feelings you are consciously aware of. It is the part of you that decides how you actually respond to the world, how much energy you carry, how much resilience you have, how much creative power flows through you on any given day. Most people live entirely on the surface. They react to whatever happens around them. Something goes wrong, they feel bad. Something goes right, they feel good. They are completely at the mercy of external circumstances, like a small boat being tossed around by waves with no steering. Larson says this is not living. This is drifting. And the difference between drifting and truly living is whether or not you have learned to access and direct the deeper currents inside you. He talks about a man he once knew, not by name but by type, the kind of man who is talented, educated, full of potential, and yet somehow kept ending up in the same difficult situations over and over again. Different cities, different jobs, different relationships, and yet the same struggles, the same frustrations, The same feeling of being just on the edge of something good and never quite reaching it. And Larson says the reason was not bad luck. The reason was that this man had never learned to change what was happening on the inside. He kept rearranging things on the outside, hoping the inside would somehow follow. It never did, because that is not how it works. The inside creates the outside, not the other way around. This is one of the central ideas in the entire book, and Larson comes back to it again and again in different ways, from different angles, with different examples, because he knows it is the idea that is hardest for most people to truly accept. We have been trained from childhood to believe that what happens to us is what shapes us, that our circumstances determine our reality. Larson says this is only half true. Yes, circumstances affect us, but the person who has developed their inner life, the person who has learned to access the deeper power Larson is describing, does not simply respond to circumstances. They respond to circumstances from a place of such inner stability, such inner richness, that even difficult circumstances become fuel rather than obstacles. He tells the story of a woman who had every external reason to give up. She had faced loss after loss. She had watched opportunities close around her like doors shutting one by one. People who saw her life from the outside would have said she had every right to be bitter, every right to be defeated, and yet she was not. There was something about her, something in the way she carried herself, in the way she talked about the future, in the way she treated every small moment as if it mattered, that made people around her feel hopeful simply by being near her. She was not pretending. She was not performing optimism for others. The hope inside her was real, and it was rooted in something she had cultivated deliberately, over years in the quiet places of her own inner world. She had found without necessarily being able to name it the way Larson names it, the hidden secret. And then Larson begins to get very specific about what this secret actually involves. The first element is what he calls the development of the whole self, and this is where he makes a distinction that I think is one of the most important ideas in the entire book. He says that most people develop themselves in fragments. They work on their career skills but neglect their emotional depth. They develop their intellect but let their intuition rust. They build physical strength but ignore the quieter, subtler qualities inside them, things like patience, receptivity, inner stillness, the ability to listen to what is happening beneath the surface of life. Larson says real development is not the development of one or two parts of yourself. It is the development of the whole self, all the dimensions of what you are, working together, in harmony, each one feeding and supporting the others. He compares it to an orchestra. If only the string section is playing and the rest of the orchestra is silent, you might get something pleasant. But it will never be the full symphony. The full symphony only happens when every instrument is awake, tuned, and playing its part. Most people, Larson says, are walking through life as if only one or two sections of their internal orchestra are playing. The rest of the instruments are sitting there, waiting, covered in dust, never touched, never heard. This is why some people with tremendous intellectual ability still feel deeply unfulfilled. The intellect is playing beautifully, but the rest of the orchestra is silent. And this is why some people with enormous emotional sensitivity still feel paralyzed and unable to move forward. The emotional instrument is rich and resonant, but nothing else is engaged to give it direction and momentum. The whole self is the secret, not just the mind, not just the heart, not just the body, not just the spirit, all of it, together in conversation with itself. Larson then moves into what might be the most quietly revolutionary section of the entire book, his discussion of what he calls the subconscious mind, or what he sometimes refers to as the deeper mind. And he approaches this with a kind of reverence that is rare in writers of any era. He does not talk about the subconscious as a mysterious, unknowable force lurking in the shadows. He talks about it as a faithful partner, one that is always listening, always learning, always working to bring into your outer life whatever you are feeding into it on the inside. Here's the part that most people find both fascinating and slightly uncomfortable. The subconscious does not evaluate what you feed it. It does not decide whether what you are giving it is good for you or bad for you. It simply accepts whatever you give it consistently, repeatedly, emotionally, and then it begins to organize your inner life, your habits, your instincts, your perceptions around that material. Whatever you have been consistently feeding your deeper mind, whether deliberately or accidentally, whether consciously or unconsciously, is what is currently running the most of your experience. Larson is very careful here not to make this sound like blame. He is not saying that people who are struggling have been doing something wrong. He is saying they have been doing something automatic, something habitual, something that was shaped by years of outside influence before they ever had the awareness or the tools to choose differently. The subconscious was being fed by circumstance, by other people's opinions, by fears absorbed in childhood, by limiting beliefs picked up along the way, and it was faithfully, dutifully, organizing everything around those inputs. But here is where Larson's voice gets warm and something like excited. Because he says the moment you understand this, truly understand it, everything changes. Because if the deeper mind is simply responding to what you consistently give it, then the moment you begin to deliberately, consciously, patiently give it something different, it will begin to respond differently. It is not easy. It does not happen overnight. Old patterns have deep roots. But it is absolutely, completely, entirely possible. He is certain of this, not as a theory, as something he has seen proven again and again in human lives. He talks about a young man who had grown up in an environment where limitation was the constant message, not through cruelty, but through circumstance. The adults around him were doing their best, but their world was small, and so the world they could show him was small. He grew up genuinely believing, not as a thought, but as a deep bone-level feeling, that certain things were not for people like him. Certain possibilities existed, but not in his direction. And so for years he unconsciously arranged his life to confirm that belief, not because he wanted to, not because he was not intelligent or capable, but because that was what his deeper mind had been handed, and it was faithfully organizing his experience around it. And then something shifted. It did not happen all at once. It started with a book, or a conversation, or a moment of stillness where something inside him said, quietly, "Wait, what if that is not actually true? What if that belief is not a fact about reality? What if it is just a program that was installed before I was old enough to choose?" And from that single moment of questioning he began, slowly, patiently, persistently, to feed his deeper mind something different. New images, new possibilities, a different sense of what he was and what he was capable of. And Larson says that over time the outer life began to reorganize itself around the inner shift. Not magically, not without effort, but genuinely, unmistakably, in ways that could not be explained by luck. This is the hidden secret in practice. Larson then spends considerable time, and this is something I want to make sure we really sit with, talking about the role of thought in human life. And he makes a distinction that is elegant and important. He separates what he calls ordinary thinking from what he calls creative thinking, or what sometimes he calls inspired thinking. Ordinary thinking is the kind most of us do most of the time. It is reactive. It is based on what we already know. It circles around existing patterns. It solves problems using the same frameworks that created the problems. It is useful. It is necessary. But it is limited. It is the thinking that keeps things running but rarely produces anything genuinely new. Creative thinking, as Larson describes it, is something different in kind, not just in degree. It is thinking that draws on the deeper currents of the mind, that reaches into regions of possibility that ordinary surface-level thought cannot access. It is the kind of thinking that produces genuine insight, genuine solutions, genuine breakthroughs. And Larson says most people have access to this kind of thinking but almost never use it, because they have not learned to create the inner conditions that allow it to emerge. He is very clear about what those conditions are. The first is stillness, not the absence of all thought, but a particular quality of inner quiet, a kind of receptive alertness, where the busy, chattering surface of the mind settles enough for the deeper currents to become audible. Larson says that most people are so constantly busy, so constantly stimulated, so constantly reacting to the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, that they never give themselves the inner space necessary for their deepest intelligence to speak. He writes about how some of the greatest discoveries, greatest solutions, greatest creative leaps in human history have come not in the middle of frantic effort, but in moments of relaxed, receptive openness. The scientist who had been working on a problem for months and then, on a quiet walk, found the answer arising fully formed from somewhere inside. The writer who had been struggling to find the right words and then, in the still moments before sleep, heard them clearly. These are not accidents. These are the natural results of giving the deeper mind the space it needs to do what it is extraordinarily capable of doing. The second condition is what Larson calls genuine desire. And he is careful here to distinguish genuine desire from mere wanting or wishing. Wishing is passive. Wishing says, it would be nice if things were different. Genuine desire, as Larson describes it, is active. It is alive. It has direction and energy and commitment behind it. It is the kind of desire that organizes everything around it toward its fulfillment. He says that when genuine desire is combined with the right use of the deeper mind, the combination becomes one of the most potent creative forces available to a human being. But here is where he adds something that many people miss. He says genuine desire must be accompanied by what he calls perfect trust, or what might more simply be called inner confidence. Not arrogance. Not the loud, brittle confidence that is actually fear dressed up in bold clothing, but a quiet, deep, settled sense that what you are moving toward is possible, that you are capable of more than you have yet demonstrated, that the path forward exists even when you cannot yet see it clearly. This kind of trust, Larson says, is not something you either have or do not have. It is something you build. It is something you cultivate. And it is built through the same process of deliberately, consistently feeding the deeper mind, around the 10-minute mark in your journey through these ideas. And if you are finding this meaningful so far, please like and subscribe to Audiobook Library, because every like and every subscription genuinely helps the channel to grow and allows us to keep bringing you content like this. Content that goes deep, that takes ideas seriously, that treats you like the intelligent and searching person you are. Now, let us continue, because we are only part way through what Larson has to share, and the ideas only deepen from here. One of the sections I find most moving in the entire book is Larson's discussion of what he calls living in the ideal. And I want to take some time with this because it is often misunderstood. When Larson talks about the ideal, he does not mean a fantasy. He does not mean pretending the world is something it is not. He does not mean ignoring real challenges or real difficulties. He means something far more specific and far more practical than that. He means the habit of consistently, in the inner life, living as if the best version of yourself and your life were real. Not as a performance, not as a deception, but as a kind of inner practice, a way of training the deeper mind by giving it a clear, vivid, emotionally alive picture of what you are moving toward. He compares it to what an athlete does when they visualize a perfect performance before the actual event. The visualization is not pretending the event has already happened. It is training the inner systems to organize themselves around the intended outcome. It is preparing the instrument. Larson says that most people do the opposite of this. Most people, without realizing it, spend enormous amounts of their inner life rehearsing what they do not want, rehearsing failure, rehearsing rejection, rehearsing all the ways things might go wrong. And the deeper mind, faithful and dutiful as always, accepts this material and begins organizing experience around it. The person then says, "See, I knew it would go wrong," not realizing that their inner rehearsal played a significant role in the outcome. Living in the ideal is the deliberate reversal of this process. It is choosing, as often as possible, to rehearse the positive, to hold in the inner life a vivid, warm, emotionally alive sense of the life you are building, the person you are becoming, the capacities you are developing, not as escapism, as training, as preparation, as a way of aligning the extraordinarily powerful subconscious machinery with the direction you actually want to move. He tells the story of a woman who wanted to become a great speaker. She was terrified of public speaking. Absolutely terrified. Every time she imagined herself in front of an audience, she saw herself failing. She saw herself forgetting her words, seeing the disapproving faces, feeling the hot shame of a terrible performance. And of course, every actual attempt she made was colored by that inner rehearsal. The body follows the mind. The voice follows what the inner picture has already set in motion. And so the performances were not good, which confirmed the fear, which deepened the inner picture of failure, which made the next performance worse. Larson says the turning point came when she began, systematically, deliberately, to change the inner picture, not by lying to herself, but by choosing, in quiet moments of genuine inner practice, to see herself speaking with confidence, with warmth, with a connection to the audience that felt real and alive. She spent time every day in this inner practice. She did not do it because she felt confident. She did it in order to build confidence, from the inside out. And gradually, slowly, in a way that surprised even her, the outer reality began to match the inner picture she had been cultivating. The voice became steadier. The fear became quieter. The performances improved, not because her external circumstances had changed, but because the program running inside had changed. This is living in the ideal, and it is one of the most practical tools Larson offers. He then moves into a discussion of what he calls the development of personal power. And here is where Larson gets very direct about something that I think is genuinely important for the way we think about ambition and drive. He says that personal power is not the power to dominate others. It is not the power to control circumstances by force. It is the power that comes from being so fully developed, so fully alive in all dimensions of your being, that you are able to meet any situation with clarity, creativity, and the full resources of your whole self. He distinguishes between what he calls external power and internal power. External power is the kind most people pursue: status, position, money, influence. And there is nothing wrong with any of these things. But Larson says the mistake is in thinking that accumulating external power will produce the feeling of power that people are actually searching for. It almost never does. Because the feeling most people are searching for, the feeling of being genuinely capable, genuinely alive, genuinely free, is an internal state. It can only be generated from the inside. External power can make life more comfortable. It can open more doors, but it cannot produce the inner experience of being truly powerful. Only the development of the inner life can do that. And this is why Larson says so many people who achieve significant external success still feel hollow, still feel like something is missing, still wake up in the morning with a vague, persistent sense that they have somehow missed the point. It is because they have built the outer structure without developing the inner foundation. They have the orchestra hall, but the orchestra is still not playing. Internal power, as Larson describes it, is developed through practice, through the consistent, patient, gentle but persistent practice of developing all the dimensions of the self. The intellectual dimension, yes, always keep learning, always keep the mind sharp and curious and reaching, but also the emotional dimension, developing emotional depth and richness and the capacity to feel life fully without being overwhelmed by it. The intuitive dimension, learning to listen to the quieter intelligence that speaks not in loud logical arguments, but in softer, subtler signals that come when the surface mind is still enough to hear them. The spiritual dimension, whatever that means to you personally, the sense of connection to something larger than the individual ego, the sense of being part of a meaningful whole. All of these together constitute the whole self that Larson is describing. And when they work together, when they are all developed and integrated and in conversation with each other, the result is what he means by personal power. Not the power to dominate. The power to be fully, magnificently, completely yourself. He spends a beautiful section of the book talking about what he calls the art of being. And this is perhaps the most quietly radical thing in the entire book, because in an era, and also in our current era, that is almost entirely focused on doing, on productivity, on achievement, on measurable output, on constant forward motion, Larson says that the quality of what you do is almost entirely determined by the quality of what you are. And the quality of what you are is determined by the quality of your inner life, your inner development, your inner depth. He is not saying do not do things. He is not advocating for passivity or withdrawal. He is saying that before you focus so intently on the doing, pay attention to the being, develop the being, deepen the being. Because a person who is deeply developed, deeply alive, deeply whole, will do things with a quality and a power and a creativity that a fragmented surface-level person cannot match, no matter how hard that fragmented person works. He talks about the difference between someone who is deeply present in what they do versus someone who is simply going through the motions. Two people can perform the same action. One is there completely, their full attention, their full aliveness, their full self brought to bear on the moment. The other is half there, going through the movements while the mind is somewhere else, the deeper self disengaged. The difference in the quality and the impact of what each person produces is not subtle. It is enormous, and the difference is entirely in the quality of being that each person brings to the doing. Larson says this is why developing the inner life is not a luxury. It is not self-indulgence. It is not a secondary concern to be addressed after the more important practical matters are handled. It is the foundation of everything. It is the source from which everything else that matters flows. Now let us talk about something Larson addresses that I think people find particularly challenging, and that is the question of how you maintain your inner development when life is hard, when circumstances are genuinely difficult, when loss is real, when pain is present, when the external world is throwing everything it has at you and the last thing you feel capable of is sitting quietly and developing your inner life. Larson does not brush past this. He takes it seriously. He acknowledges that genuine difficulty is real. He acknowledges that suffering is real. He is not a naive optimist who pretends that positive thinking makes pain disappear. He is something more interesting than that. He is a person who has thought deeply about how the inner life and the outer life interact, and who has come to believe, based on years of observation and experience, that the inner life is the only place where genuine resilience comes from. He talks about what he calls meeting adversity from the inside out, and what he means is this. There is a way of encountering difficulty where you are simply at the mercy of it, where the difficulty lands on you and you react, and the reaction is entirely determined by whatever your current inner state happens to be. If your inner state is strong, the reaction is relatively stable. If your inner state is fragile, the reaction is destabilizing. But in either case, you are responding from whatever you happen to currently be. You are not choosing your response. The response is being chosen for you by your existing inner conditions. And then there is another way of encountering difficulty, where, over time, through deliberate inner development, you have built inside yourself such a rich, deep, stable inner foundation that even when adversity comes, and it will come, your response comes from that foundation, rather than from whatever surface-level state the adversity has thrown you into. You are not unaffected. You are not made of stone. You feel the difficulty fully. But you feel it from a place of inner stability that allows you to respond with your full self, with all your intelligence and creativity and resilience, rather than from a place of panic or paralysis or bitterness. Larson says this is what separates people who seem to bend but never break from people who are shattered by the same kind of challenges. It is not that the people who bend but never break have easier lives. Often they have harder ones. It is that they have built something inside themselves that can hold the weight of difficulty without collapsing. And that something was built, deliberately, patiently, over time, through the kind of inner development Larson is describing. He tells the story of a man, a businessman, who lost almost everything. Not once, but twice, the kind of losses that would have made many people give up entirely. After the first loss, he was devastated. The inner foundation was not yet built. He spent months in a kind of grey, fog-like state, barely moving forward, barely functioning. But during those months, something began to shift. He began, almost accidentally at first, to pay attention to his inner life in a way he never had before. He began to read. He began to think, not just reactively, but with genuine curiosity about what was happening inside him and why. He began to develop, slowly and painfully but genuinely, the inner qualities Larson describes. When the second loss came years later, it was just as objectively significant, just as real, just as costly. But his inner response was completely different. Not because he was not affected, but because the inner foundation he had built in the years between the two losses was able to hold the weight. He was shaken, but not shattered. He was set back, but not stopped. And within a period that surprised even himself, he had rebuilt, this time from a far stronger and more conscious foundation than before. The third version of his work was the best of all. Not in spite of the losses, but in some real and meaningful way because of what the losses had driven him to develop inside himself. This is what Larson means when he says that genuine inner development transforms even difficulty into fuel. He then moves into a discussion of what he calls the higher possibilities of the mind. And this is where the book takes on a quality that I can only describe as expansive. Larson believed, and he says this clearly and without apology, that the human mind is capable of far more than its current average level of operation would suggest. He believed that what we call genius, what we call extraordinary creative capacity, what we call the ability to see connections that others miss and to find solutions that others cannot, these are not special gifts reserved for a lucky few. They are capacities of the human mind, latent in everyone, that develop in response to the right inner conditions. He says this with the confidence of someone who has spent years observing human beings and has seen again and again that the dividing line between the person who achieves something extraordinary and the person who does not is almost never raw innate talent. It is almost always the degree to which each person has developed and learned to access the full range of their own inner capacity. The genius is not someone with a different brain. The genius is someone who has, through practice or circumstance, or sheer determined cultivation, learned to access parts of the mind that most people leave dormant. And this is available, Larson insists, to everyone. Not to the same degree, because people begin from different points and have different natural inclinations. But the direction is universal. Every single person has more access to their own deeper intelligence than they are currently using. Every single person has capacities that are currently dormant that could be awakened through the right kind of development. Every single person is, in a very real sense, a hidden genius waiting for the conditions that will allow them to emerge. He talks about the practice of what he calls turning the mind toward the highest. And what he means is the deliberate habit of, when faced with any challenge or any question, reaching past the first obvious answers that the surface mind generates and asking, what else is possible? What does my deepest intelligence say about this? What does the part of me that knows more than my conscious reasoning can yet articulate have to offer here? This is the practice of deliberately consulting the deeper mind, rather than relying entirely on the reactive surface. He acknowledges that this takes practice. That the surface mind, accustomed to running the show, does not immediately step aside and let the deeper intelligence speak. There is a period of cultivation required, a period of patient practice, of learning to create the inner conditions of stillness and receptivity that allow the deeper mind to become audible. But he says the practice is worth every moment of investment. Because once you have developed the capacity to access your own deeper intelligence reliably, the difference in the quality of what you are able to think and create and do is not incremental. It is transformational. Larson also writes beautifully about what he calls the law of attraction, though he approaches it with far more nuance and depth than the pop culture version of this idea. He is not talking about wishing for things and having them materialize. He is talking about something more subtle and more grounded than that. He is talking about the way that the dominant inner state of a person tends to attract and draw toward them experiences, opportunities, and connections that resonate with that inner state. A person who is genuinely, deeply, internally alive with a particular quality, whether that is curiosity or generosity or creative energy, or the confident expectation of good things, will tend to find that the world around them responds to that inner quality. Not through magic. Through the fact that the inner state shapes what the person notices, how they behave, what risks they are willing to take, how they treat others, what they are open to receiving. All of these practical, concrete behaviors are shaped by the inner state, and those behaviors then shape the outer reality. The inner state does not directly create the outer reality, but it creates the person who creates the outer reality. He says the most important question you can ask yourself is not what do I want my life to look like? It is what do I want my inner life to be? What quality of inner experience do I want to cultivate? What kind of person do I want to be developing toward? Because the answer to those questions is the seed from which everything else will grow. Get the seed right, and the tree takes care of itself. Get the seed wrong, and no amount of effort applied to the branches and leaves will produce the fruit you are looking for. There is a passage in the book where Larson talks about what he calls the enriched moment, and it is one of those passages that you read, and then have to stop for a moment and just let it settle. He says that most people treat the present moment as merely a means to an end. They are always somewhere else in their minds, always in the future, where things will be better, or in the past, where things were different. They walk through the actual present moment of their lives as if it were an obstacle course to be navigated on the way to some future destination where real life will finally begin. And Larson says this is one of the most devastating things a person can do to their own inner development. Because the inner life does not develop in the future, it does not develop in the past. It develops only in the present moment, in the actual lived quality of right now, in the attention and aliveness you bring to the experience you are actually having. And every moment you spend absent from the present, lost in future projection or past regret, is a moment your inner life is not developing, a moment of potential growth that passes unused. He calls the practice of truly inhabiting the present moment one of the highest forms of inner discipline. Not because it is easy, not because it is comfortable, but because it is the only moment in which anything real can happen, the only moment in which genuine development can occur, the only moment in which you can actually choose, actually act, actually live. Every other moment is memory or imagination. Only the present is real, and therefore only in the present can real work be done. He connects this to the idea of living with full aliveness. He says that one of the signs that a person is genuinely developing their inner life is that they begin to feel more alive, not in a loud, dramatic way necessarily, but in the quiet way of someone who is genuinely present in their own experience, who genuinely inhabits their own life, who finds richness and depth in moments that used to feel flat and routine. This increasing aliveness is both the sign of development and also itself the environment in which further development becomes possible. Larson has a section on what he calls the power of faith, and I want to be careful here because he is using the word faith in a very specific way that is not primarily religious, though it is certainly compatible with religious belief. What he means by faith is an inner quality of positive expectation, a deep-settled conviction that the universe, life, reality is fundamentally on your side, that the direction of things is toward growth, toward development, toward the expansion of what is possible, that difficulties are not signs that things are fundamentally broken, but rather that forces are at work that will, if you can hold your inner posture, ultimately resolve into something better and stronger. He says this quality of faith is not something you either have or you do not. It is something you build through experience, through the accumulated evidence of your own inner development working in your life, through the practice of noticing the times when things worked out, through the deliberate cultivation of a mind that looks for possibility rather than defaulting to fear. It is, like everything else he discusses, something that grows with practice. And he says when you combine this quality of inner faith with the development of the whole self, with the deliberate practice of feeding the deeper mind, with the habit of living in the ideal, with the capacity to access deeper intelligence, the result is something that Larson can only describe as a life that is genuinely and increasingly working. A life where you feel yourself moving with the current of your own deepest nature, rather than constantly fighting against it. A life where the inner and outer are in increasingly harmonious relationship with each other. A life where, even on the difficult days, even when things go wrong, even when loss is present, there is still an underlying sense of direction, of meaning, of genuine forward movement. This is the life Larson is pointing toward. Not a perfect life, not a life without challenge or difficulty or loss, but a life that is genuinely, deeply, increasingly alive. A life in which the full symphony of what you are is playing. He ends the book with what I find to be one of the most quietly moving passages I have encountered in any book of this kind. He says that the hidden secret is not a technique, it is not a formula, it is not a shortcut or a system or a life hack. It is a relationship. The relationship between the conscious self and the deeper self. The relationship between the surface mind and the deeper mind. The relationship between who you currently are and who you are in the process of becoming. And like all genuine relationships, it requires attention, it requires care, it requires consistency and patience and the willingness to show up even when progress is not immediately visible. It requires trust. It requires the courage to keep developing even when the evidence of development is still subtle and the old patterns are still strong. But Larson says, and he says it with the warmth of someone who deeply believes it, that the relationship is worth everything it asks of you, because on the other side of that patient, consistent, devoted relationship with your own deeper self is a quality of life that most people only glimpse in rare golden moments, but that is actually available, genuinely available, as a sustained and growing way of being. He believed in human beings. He believed in their capacity for growth. He believed that every single person, no matter where they started, no matter what their history, no matter what their circumstances, carries within them the seeds of something genuinely magnificent. And his whole life's work was about creating the conditions in which those seeds could grow. The hidden secret is not something that can be handed to you. No book, no teacher, no system can give it to you directly, but they can point. They can describe the territory. They can offer a map, and then the journey is yours to take. In the only place the journey can ever actually happen. In the quiet, rich, endlessly fascinating interior of your own living, breathing, reaching, becoming self. If this journey through Larson's ideas has meant something to you, if it has stirred something or sparked a thought, or reminded you of something you already knew but had temporarily set aside, then please do something simple and meaningful. Like this video, subscribe to Audiobook Library, leave a comment below telling us what idea from Larson's work landed most deeply for you. Every like, every subscription, every comment is a genuine act of support for this channel and helps us continue doing exactly this, bringing you books and ideas that go deep, that take human experience seriously, and that treat you as the thoughtful and searching person you are. And please, do not stop here. Our channel has a whole library of videos just like this one, summaries and explorations of books that can genuinely change the way you understand yourself and your life. Check out our other videos, browse the library, find the next book that calls to you, because the ideas that transform a life rarely arrive all at once. They arrive in layers, over time, each one building on the last, each one opening a new door, each one pointing further in the direction of a life more fully and beautifully lived. Christian D. Larson wrote his books at a time when the world was very different from ours in many ways, and yet completely identical in the ways that matter most. People then, just as now, were searching for meaning, searching for capacity, searching for the feeling that their lives had direction and depth and genuine forward momentum, searching for the hidden secret that would explain why some people seem to live so fully and others feel like they are only half there, searching for the key to their own deeper nature. He found something worth sharing, and the reason his work still resonates, still moves people, still feels true, is because what he found is not a product of his time. It is a truth about human nature, about the relationship between the inner and outer life, about the extraordinary capacity that every human being carries within them, waiting, always waiting to be developed and directed and brought fully into the light. The hidden secret was never hidden from you. It was always there, in the deepest part of what you are, waiting for you to be ready to look for it. Now you have looked, and whatever you do with what you have found, do it with the full aliveness of your whole self. Because that, in the end, is all Larson ever really asked.